Derek, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It should be fun.
Derek, you are a senior director in one of the biggest banks in Canada, yet you still decided to leave and start Walnut. So, can you just explain why someone who's made it that far in the corporate world still decided to start his own business venture?
Yeah, sure. So, I would say I was fortunate in that I actually initially sort of was going through school and doing a project on the side around, deals and shopping. And so I actually started my sort of formal career as an entrepreneur, and I built and sold a business called Red Flag Deals. And then it wasn't until many years later that I started working for sort of the big bank. In Canada, RBC is the biggest bank and I think the largest, company in Canada. And I'm always looking to learn. So, like, one of the things I wanted to learn is like, can I help a large organization be able to like be nimble and be able to move quickly and catch up with some of, in that case, more of like the fintechs that were playing in this space. So to me, it was a challenge, and it was something that I spent, 3 years working with a lot of really like great teams, learned a lot about like how these large corporations think about risk in particular as a bank. They sort of, hammer that home, which I think is healthy. But large organizations also have their challenges, and one of those is like being able to move quickly. And so ultimately, I think there's lots of opportunities in embedded insurance is the space that Walnut plays in. How do we use technology to be able to enable that? And the clearest path sort of forward to scratch that itch was to do it sort of, outside and do it independently. So I learned a lot and took a lot of the insights to try to figure out like how I can help, organizations like that and others, but more in a startup vein, leveraging technology, for insurance. So, itchy fingers perhaps at the end, but I definitely wanted to move fast and therefore with like AI these days, even I think it's like a whole new sort of shift in the way people are thinking about whether it's like building products, go to market. I'm sure there's like all sorts of stuff out there on like vibe coding, vibe marketing these days. So everything's changing and it's much faster at a start.
Do you feel like the skills you acquired, because like you said, you built a company, you sold it, you did a bunch of other companies. Do you feel like the skills that you had there and you learned were able to translate in the corporate world as well, or were they two different worlds?
They're different, but there's a lot of transferable skills. So like I think communication skills, for instance, are just largely transferable like across the board. Of course, COVID happened, so then it's like another mode of communication. So you could do a lot in person previously, and that all turned into sort of Zoom. And therefore, working remote, and we are a fully remote company. You need to be able to communicate your ideas in like a video conferencing format, but also written format. So I think like writing skills become even more important these days, versus maybe where they were, a decade ago. So all the stuff around communication, I think, is largely transferable. What was interesting and what I learned a lot about at, sort of the large bank is enterprise and enterprise sales and how they think about it as the customer and what are sort of the things that are flags or risks. So back to the risk notion is like how do you build a system from a security and from a compliance and from an audit perspective is safe, secure, auditable, trackable, and be able to like explain that to potential customers. So buying from a startup is potentially riskier than buying from IBM, but it doesn't have to be. And there's ways you can manage that. And how do you be able to sort of whether it be building pilot programs or sort of narrowing the scope of the information and data you might need to be able to work through phases to be able to get larger and larger customers and larger and larger pieces of work with those existing customers. So enterprise sales communication I think is like largely like transferable skills. And one of the nice things of being in the large corporates is that everybody will take your call, so you also benefit from just having more exposure, perhaps, to all sorts of different like folks and expertise that'd be hard to get in one shop when you're a small company.
You jumped into the insurance world, and for a lot of us, insurance is quite an intimidating market. There's a lot of big players. Do you feel like the network you've grown over the years helped you gain the courage to start Walnut Insurance? Or
Yes, but like I think I think it's good to be slightly naive So it's like you want to know a little bit, you want to know enough that gets you excited. And we were very and still are very excited about embedded insurance and the technology behind it. Like that's our like sort of angle on it. Like you said, there's lots of big incumbents. They've been around hundreds of years. They're very successful. We view that as like an opportunity. They're successful and we can help them and we can be partners. One of the things I've learned over time with insurance that I didn't necessarily know like day one is that insurance is much more of a co-opetition style business. I would say in the banking space, your JP Morgans of the world are basically happy to like bank everybody. Whereas insurers are not like that. It's not like they want to take on the risk of every customer. That could be geographic, that could be demographic, that could just be like product type and what their sort of experience is managing underwriting risk. And so it's actually bringing together a lot of different parties to be able to make embedded insurance like work. And we've really like enjoyed that process. Part of the opportunity, if you think about relative to financial services, is insurance is further behind. I think most folks would say their experience, say, signing up for a neobank versus signing up for insurance. The insurance piece probably needs more work. And to us, that was exciting. We felt like there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of opportunity, leveraging data that platforms have to create more modern experiences. So it felt like there was almost like more room on the insurance side to be able to modernize. And what we liked about insurance is that you ultimately can't escape it. So it's like whether that's like home insurance, auto insurance, life insurance, like if you ask somebody whether they have an insurance product or service, the answer is inevitably yes. It's just what type of insurance. And it's only going to be more embedded over time than it is today. So you have things like embedded card insurance and credit card for extended warranties, purchase protection, for even like, price, cash back. You have travel insurances that's very familiar. But there's all sorts of sort of new like models like Tesla's doing with all the data they have and sort of Tesla's insurance baked right in to the vehicle. And there's like these porch piracy products out there for folks that are worried about their Amazon packages, for instance, being stolen. And so there's so much data being shared these days that our view is that you don't need to go and sort of blast everybody. Like you don't need to have a Geico Super Bowl ad to try to attract customers. It's how do you understand the customer and be able to get to them at the point in time where they have that need and be able to offer a more modern experience so they can get the coverage they need at point in time. And we want to be the technology provider. And there's just so much opportunity to do that that makes us really excited about what we can do.
You've mentioned embedded insurance a couple of times. Can you just elaborate a bit about what that really means?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really using data and insight. So when we go to market, our brand is Walnut, but you would typically not see that as the brand. And so the partners that we work with, the Neo Financials, the Cohos, the Teluses of the world, they would be the leader brand. We'd sort of be the powered by brand to enable that experience. And the reason that works is they have some insight and data about the customer to be able to enable a journey. So embedded insurance, we typically bucket into three types. One is embedded inside. So that's things like your credit card insurances. If you make a purchase, it might have mobile phone protection if you're buying the phone using that card, or if you're traveling, you ha already have access to collision damage waiver when you go rent a car. You don't need the incremental; it's sort of built in into that vehicle. The second one is an embedded opt-in. So this is the extended warranty type of model, the creditor insurance, debt cancellation, where you're sort of in a journey, you're checking out travel insurance on the Expedies of the world, where you sort of check a box largely and be able to have access to that incremental insurance coverage at a specific premium that you're paying. And then third model is what we think of as embedded journeys. There's a whole bunch of licensing regulatory complications with insurance. So even if you wanted to, we do this in home, like you with a home mortgage, it's not like you can sort of check a box and get home insurance. It has to be a separate like product. So we have some data, we have the property information, we have the personal information, and they need home insurance to close the mortgage, but it's actually still a embedded journey for us to sell an individual insurance product to them, which is the property insurance in that case. So that's more of a journey driven based on data. And that's the thing that sort of, glues everything together is the insight in the data and the relevance versus, just sort of like spray and pray of, trying to get in front of an audience and just come to us where, Geico's very successful. It's just very hard to compete with Geico these days. So our track is how do we do it via partners?
Financial institutions, insurance, they are usually slower to adapt newer technologies. Was this an opportunity for you as a relatively recent company to try and leverage this new tech, AI, and try to grab that market?
Yeah, and I think, like you said, the FIs are like the traditional folks, the incumbents perhaps are a little bit slower to adopt. And so one of our first sort of enterprise style customers was Neo Financial, and they're a neobank in the Canadian market. So I think, from a go-to-market perspective and a timeline perspective, hey, you're a startup, you got to go and like you got to close, and it's probably early stages going to be a little bit easier to find the more modern, financial stacks, the neobanks of the world, the fintechs of the world, the folks that like tech is at the center and at the core, and finding those customers first. And then over time, you sort of like level up. Like National Bank is a customer of ours as well. And I don't think they would have necessarily been the first customer, but once we build a track record and we can sort of show experience, then it makes it easier and easier to like bring the incremental customer. So it's like I often think of this as like a step up, right? Like you're not necessarily going to go and sign, the biggest partner in your category, financial services or otherwise, like on day one. You probably need to show some proof points along the way, and then you get to the stage where you almost have a right to play to be able to get some of the bigger customers on board. And even though like it's pro and con, they might be slower initially to adopt, but of course the incumbents have a large customer base, so it's a trade-off, but either way, like the goal is to be able to create like compelling experiences that deliver ROI. The reason, parties work with us is they're either looking for more customer stickiness, like multi-product, make sure that they sort of stay with the brand, or they're looking for revenue, and being able to add an incremental product to the stack because they've already acquired the customer and paid for that CAC. Now, how do I get more lifetime customer value? And the honest answer is it's usually some combination of both. So how do we help them, reach these goals?
You were able to raise a significant amount of money quite recently, I think about less than a year ago. So my question to you is, did you, how did you navigate this? Did you have advisors? Were you experienced in raising capital? How does one learn how to do that?
I mean, there's lots of content online, YouTube videos, like slide decks, articles, and so on. And I think that's like helpful. Advisors also super helpful because they've been through it in the past. A lot of them are other entrepreneurs that have sort of done exactly what we're trying to do in terms of raise money. They're just further along. And so these are all like additive. In the end, like you're just gonna have to do some pitching and then get the real life experience because I think you can ultimately like learn as much as you can from sort of like book knowledge, but the rubber hits the road when you're doing it. So I think there is a certain degree of it's the number of reps and then getting the feedback and the loops. And we initially raised our first round in end of 2020. And if you think about sort of the time and the space, that was an environment that was a lot easier to raise capital, lower interest rates. Everybody wanted to deploy. Now in 2024, when we raised our last round, it was harder. So we're also further along. We have like traction. So I think we want people to be excited about the market, embedded insurance, the size and the opportunity and the scope and where we can go. We want people to be excited about our traction so far. In terms of like what we're able to accomplish with the capital that we've raised, who are the clients that we've brought on, how did the economics look of that? And we want people to be excited about the team. So who have we brought on board? What is their level of experience? Do they have experience in insurance, selling to enterprise, AI, all of those components? Those are probably the three things that like we like largely find is like most valuable. And so focusing in on therefore in investors that have an interest in insurance tech, for instance, have an interest in financial services to try to narrow the list down. But ultimately, like there's no we haven't found a shortcut. I think, investor intros from network and so on all help. These are all things that are helpful. But in the end, it does just require like, reps and pitching. And I wish there was a way to shortcut it, but I haven't found
Mm.
it. But maybe other folks have.
When you're building a team, because you've worked in corporate and in startup environment, do you look for different profiles if you're in a large company or if you're building a startup, or it's just about the skills and the passion or all of that? So how does that differ in terms of hiring?
Yeah, I think one of the key things, like in a startup that is very different from a large enterprise, of course, is like the stability and the change. So I think you are looking for folks that are a little bit more adaptable in the startup stage. Because you won't know what exactly the business looks like. Like we can all have a hypothesis on like these are the types of customers and this is exactly the product. I know exactly what to build. It's going to be like amazing when we launch this thing. I would say that's the exception rather than the rule. It wasn't for us. It's not like we opened the doors and everybody started running in and it was easy. So I think it's like, therefore, how do you adapt? How do you change? How do you like, some people might call it pivot. But in the end, that can be uncomfortable for folks that like, are used to sort of running an existing business with a lot of, infrastructure, historical data makes it easier to make decisions. Here at early stage, you're trying to make decisions based on a lot of ambiguous data. And, they're not yet at the point of it's mature. And so you have to sort of have more, willingness to make some of the leaps in logic and sort of fill in the gaps and be comfortable with that. I think you have to be a little bit more sort of therefore action oriented, and be like, trying to figure out like, what is timeline sensitive and what is prioritization sensitive. Whereas the cycles are a little bit slower, at a corporate level. So we want people that are nimble, people that can move fast, people that have a growth mindset so they can pick up like new skills, and communication. And because we're remote, I think we've one of the things we've realized is like that is really important, even more so than perhaps when you're working in person to screen for is would they be comfortable, working remote? And is that something that they're going to enjoy and, be effective at? So it is a little bit of a different skill set. We try to, when we go through the interview process, like, be upfront and, tell people, hey, this is like a highly changing role. Like I wish I could tell you what the job description is today, and this is going to hold true for the next, 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, 3 months. But this is what our needs are today, and it can dramatically change over the next little while, depending on whether it's like fundraising or which products get to market or where we find success. So adaptability and change is huge.
You had a lot of successes in your life. You were able to one of your company got acquired. You were able to reach a very high position in the corporate world. You were able to raise a lot of funds. But let's talk about challenges. What was the most challenging part of building Walnut Insurance?
Fundraising is one of the most challenging parts.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it was easier back when everybody, of course, wanted to deploy into
Mhm.
venture. Now, I think everybody, and rightly so, are a little bit more cautious. Insurance is not the space that arguably is the sexiest of like places to invest. So you have to sort of, tell the story of why they should care about insurance. And really learning how to sort of match the right potential investors to what you can offer as a company, I think is like, really hard. Sales and sales velocity, I think is still a challenge. So, if you're working enterprise deals, the predictability of an enterprise deal and what quarter, what month it might close, maybe what year in certain cases, really hard to be able to build out, forecasts and so on. So, we're still learning. We still feel we have a lot of work to do to improve like the sales like cycle, and to be able to just get customers to sort of see the opportunity around embedded insurance. So educating the market for us, like being in a sort of new-ish or at least new adjacent market, is part of the challenge. So it's, like you can sort of see over time, there is increasing search volume for embedded insurance. But it's not like, people go into Google today and typing in home insurance. I mean, that's probably a very stable consistent thing. Like we're trying to ride and grow a category and educate and grow a category. So for us, that has been part of the challenge.
I'm going to end with this. Derek, what's the next big milestone for Walnut Insurance?
We are looking to get some interesting products around like addressing needs customers have around job loss and like bills that they need to pay and how do we help them protect that. I think there's a lot of economic uncertainty these days. And so if there's something we can do to help folks feel a little bit more protected and comfortable in case of some of these adverse events and be able to do this in a cost-effective solution, with partners that are aligned to that. We'll have more to announce, but we're pretty excited by that as an embedded insurance like category that we can build out, certainly across Canada, the US, and then hopefully elsewhere beyond that.
Derek, thank you so much for taking the time. That was a fascinating
No problem.
conversation.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.